we'll wrap up the audit. But then we're starting budget and we're getting the whole new budget system.
Were we able to get that? No more Excel spreadsheets? Like, people in your profession are so nervous about the Excel spreadsheets. They're so bothered by that.
Yeah, it's a crappy way to do budget. Not to mention we adopt the budget on an Excel spreadsheet, but then what's in the finance system doesn't match. Like it does in total, it does by the department, not by the categories. So once you pass it, like you got salaries and benefits and you have operations. Finance sits there and decides on operations whether it goes in your copier account or this or this. I wonder if people never knew what the hell was in
So
the
the new
budget.
one's gonna be that specific?
Oh yeah. Well, we have to decide the level of specificity that we want to use.
You don't want to give us anything.
No, I know. No, we're not. No, I know. No, I think what we're gonna do. No, I think what we're gonna do is probably do it like the because Jody and I both came from accounting and it works. So the categories will be, they call it personal services, but personnel costs, salaries and benefits. Contract services, where we're hiring something from outside that's not buying supplies or something. Supplies and materials. Got to come up with a better name. County calls it business and travel, but training, education, if you did travel somewhere, subscriptions to LexisNexis or whatever.
Right.
And then capital outlay. And so those will be the budget categories. And then we'll have detail that goes down below that, which we can provide you with that detail, but then once it's in there, what's here matches what's here. It is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It's absolutely mind-boggling.
That's true. I think departments too who save, like the email we got from fire chief about saving on the whatever system they had that was less paper, more automated. When you save, I think we also don't have a way of tracking and measuring and giving credit for that savings because it's all kind of just one big number. And so it doesn't say this copier budget was this year, this year, and this is the decrease, this is the savings. It's just kind of lost in the bigger number. I know I wouldn't know how to tell that difference year to year. So it's good that his system pulled it out and said this is how much you saved since you had this.
Yeah.
They criticize us when the Excel spreadsheet don't get there. It's like, okay.
You do get serious when you're giving previous, but your subject matter is serious. Fair. You do.
You know,
It's very serious.
speaking of serious, Saturday was great.
Was it?
So you're up next.
Okay.
You're
Good.
up next, and I think it's going to be a pretty positive.
I got stuck at a baby shower all morning, but it was a great baby shower.
I was getting ready to
It was great.
We don't get stuck at baby
Right.
What baby shower did you go to?
It was actually, they held it at Pitt Moyer Center. It was my friends. They've been trying to have a baby for 4 years, and they have been trying, and they're finally pregnant. And it was like, you were crying, you were laughing, you were eating, you were hanging out, you were high-fiving.
I was over there for me with Arch in the outdoor fitness center, and I did see some that, and I didn't know if it was a bridal shower or a baby shower.
Because that's how beautiful it was decorated.
I saw that. Oh,
It was
wonderful.
It was beautiful.
Wonderful. So hello. Well, surprise.
Look at the treat we have today.
Y'all let your kid go on vacation and punish me. You'll learn the next time.
Deserves it.
I know, don't worry, I got it. I got it back here. She's gonna sit in my December 20th meeting, so I only have one meeting this month. I said, oh, I'll do it. But you gonna sit in mine on December 20th.
Traja.
And I will be at home.
Aren't you bad?
That's funny.
Aren't you bad?
That's fine. Oh, yeah, well, is a written copy back there?
Oh, I didn't know you guys needed it.
Oh, thank you. Do you need one?
No, I got
Okay.
my
Okay, thank you.
iPad right here.
The inauguration was wonderful.
Was it?
It was.
I wasn't there.
You weren't there?
No.
Well, there was someone way on the other side and some of us on the other side. So it was very nice.
I haven't even got a chance to read the cliff notes from his speech in the paper. They were saying the four things he highlighted as his priorities. I think it was the environment, immigration, something else, and something else. So I want to read over what he was saying is going to be the focus.
Oh, okay.
So,
He had quite a few focuses that he rattled off. Oh, yeah.
Now having been in the paper and quoted by the paper, I'm so much more, I give it much more of a second look and a different eye.
Okay.
I used to just read it and go, that must be it.
Is Fred sitting up here?
Yes.
All three of us sitting?
And now I read it and go,
Has anybody heard from Fred? Good evening. The Standing Committee of the Public Safety Committee is now called to order. It is Monday, December the 3rd, 2018, at 6:08 p.m. Good evening to everyone. Roll call. Alderman Fred Payon.
I'm here.
Alderwoman Shanika Henson.
Present.
And yours truly, Rhonda Pendell Charles. Approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Nay. No one. Business before the committee, number 4. A, approval of minutes. PC 11.05.18, approval of minutes for the regular meeting, which is attached. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
I can't see the minutes, so
Okay. Did you look at them earlier? I guess I didn't either. Alderwoman Henson?
I went in through my email and was able to take a look at the meetings. They correspond to the agenda. There were just notations made next to each agenda item as identified, so I would move to approve the minutes.
Second?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approval of the minutes have occurred. The first
Same time.
item on the agenda is ID-307-18, Annapolis Police Department update, written report and comments, year-to-date overdose summary. And we have Chief Baker and Lieutenant Kraus.
City manager may go forward.
Absolutely. I don't think we have a problem with. Oh, yes, and brownie points too. Anyway, legislation before the committee, so we want to skip to number 5, is that correct? Yes, please. All right, and that would be 0-41-18, emergency procurement for the purpose of authorizing the appropriation of funds for an emergency procurement and for establishing a procedure for the procurement of goods and services during an emergency. And we have with us today our esteemed city manager, Ms. Teresa Sutherland. Good evening, Ms. Sutherland.
Good evening. So I understand you all had some questions when this came before you last time. So I just wanted to walk you through it. So currently, the provisions of the city code allow me to transfer up to $25,000 within a fund without seeking city council approval. This would allow me to transfer funds again for an emergency procurement. So first of all, it is a transfer of funds. There must be funding available somewhere. We can't just go out and make the procurement and not have an appropriation to pay for it. But it allows me, if I need to transfer an appropriation from here to wherever I need it to make that procurement. It also says that whenever the time required to comply with the procurement laws, regulations, or requirements would endanger the health or safety of people or property, the procurement officer may make an emergency procurement after obtaining my approval. And then all of that has to be, it's limited to only the goods and services necessary to meet the emergency and only for the duration of the emergency. And to the extent that it's possible or practicable, it will conform to the city's procurement laws. So some of your questions were whether there was a limit on the amount. There is not a limit on the amount. It is because if it's an emergency, it's an emergency, and we need to go buy what we need to buy. But we do have to have sufficient budget funds somewhere to pay for it. We can't exceed the budget and do it. And again, it is limited to the duration of the emergency. So if I can answer any other questions you may have, be happy to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Sutherland. Any questions? Alderwoman Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Sutherland, the portion of the code that states that purchases cannot be made absent an appropriation. So are you saying that anything that may need to be purchased in an emergency has already been appropriated?
Nope, I'm not. What I'm saying is that provision would still apply. Nothing can be purchased without an appropriation. What it's allowing me to do is transfer an appropriation from, whose money am I taking? The police department to the fire department. From the fire department to the police department, whatever. It allows me to identify somewhere in the budget where there might be available appropriations and use them for the emergency. So you still have to have a sufficient appropriation.
Does this have any provision for then following that up with notice to the council or to the finance department or
Yes.
coming back retroactively?
I am required to report it to you on the next regular agenda, on the regular agenda of your next scheduled meeting.
And then do we define anywhere in the code what an emergency is? Do we give any parameters on emergency, or is that at the discretion of the actor?
This says when it endangers the health or safety of people or property. And when you asked about a list, the procurement officer is also required to maintain a complete current file record explaining or otherwise supporting the basis for each emergency purchase that was made. And it's available for public inspection.
When it says that it shall comply with the city procurement laws, what does that mean? Does that still give them enough nimbleness to act in an emergency, or what are the city procurement laws that it would comply with otherwise?
So if we had a procurement law that said, you have to get three written quotes. If I have an emergency and I can call 3 known vendors and get 3 written quotes, we'll still be required to. But if we can't get written quotes, because we need to make the purchase immediately, maybe we call 3 vendors and we get 3 verbal quotes. So to the extent that it's practicable for us to comply with our purchasing regulations, we are still required to do so.
So the procurement laws, where are they in the code?
They aren't. That's one of the things I originally pointed out to you all on the transition team. We have no procurement law. We're working on one, but we have none right now. But we don't want to not put that in here, because when we do have one, we don't want to have to amend this then to add laws. So right now what we have are requirements that are just policy.
So when I understand our current city personnel, Mr. Snyder, maybe I have been calling his title inappropriately. Is he a purchasing? I thought his title was...
We have procurement officer in one section. We have purchasing officer or agent in another section, and his title, so it's procurement officer, purchasing agent, purchasing officer. One is his title, and then one is a provision that says, I think the Office of Finance shall have a procurement officer or something like that. There are 3 conflicting titles. We're going to clean that stuff up as well. But we got to get to it.
Does this give you the ability to act without the procurement officer? Let's say it was an emergency and you could not get to the procurement officer. No. Do you see any need for us to maybe designate a person who is an acting procurement officer if that person's not available? You still think it would leave enough room for you to make purchases? How so?
I just think it'll be fine. We haven't run into issues. If Brian is off, he can designate someone, I believe, to be the procurement officer.
Maybe when we make procurement laws, we could address that.
Yeah, often it'll say the procurement officer or his designee, his or her designee, that kind of thing. And yes, we can definitely consider that when we do procurement law.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Payon, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sutherland.
Thank you.
At this time, if we have no further questions or discussion, I would entertain a motion that 0-4118 be referred to our county, been in the county today, to our city council colleagues for favorable approval.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? No one? The legislation for this body is passed. We will go back to our original agenda, the ID-307-18, Annapolis Police Department update, written report and comments, year-to-date overdose summary.
Excuse me.
So it's kind of, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's a little unusual that when I looked at the agenda, we all had the same topics listed for the agenda, which I don't know what happened, but. So,
One is for the police and one is for fire.
right, but it's all the same topic, right?
Well, it might be a slight difference in presentation or emphasis.
Okay.
2 is always better than 1.
Sometimes. I'm a cop, I don't know that that's always true.
We'll see.
Okay. So just,
Thank you, Chief Baker.
yes, ma'am. Let me give you some general updates about what has been going on. Some community outreach we've been doing. PAL program over at the Boys and Girls Club on Monday nights. Lieutenant Krause has been going over there and participating with them. We have Citizens Police Academy graduation on Wednesday. Alderman Pindell Charles, I invited you, and I think
Yes,
you're going
sir,
to say
I
a few
plan to
words.
be there.
Yes. And so this is the second one that we had this year. So I believe this is the first year that we actually had two, and then we're getting better attendance each time that we've held one. So if you haven't had the opportunity to go, and you've got 8, 10 Wednesday nights available, I know you're all very busy, but I think it's very interesting for people to sit through and really learn about what we do in deadly force and the split-second decisions that we have to make. 2 classes ago, we had the opportunity to go to Fort Meade and use their shoot, don't shoot equipment, and it was very eye-opening to the citizens that attended. We're actually looking at purchasing the equipment ourselves, so maybe if you'd like to go through some of the training once we get that equipment, I think it would be good. We just completed supervisor in-service training, and this is the first time, I believe, since I've been there that we've separated officers and sergeants, or officers and supervisors. Generally, in February, March, they all go together because there are certain classes that the training commission says that we have to go through. But this was separate and above what normally is required. We brought in somebody from the Naval Academy to talk about leadership. We talked about internal affairs and about how to investigate internal complaints. We talked about ethics, civil liability, just our general expectation of supervisors. And then we talked about ethics and racial profiling and how to go into the system and review what your officers are doing. And then if there is something that sticks out, then how the next steps in that process. So I just received today, and this is the first time I've ever brought this up in front of the committee, recommendations for Officer of the Month. So every month we do a program Officer of the Month, and they get a mug and a gift certificate to a restaurant. What's unusual about November is that we actually had 2 supervisors nominated for Officer of the Month. Now, I won't give it to supervisors because I want to recognize the officers who are on the street every day doing the routine police work. So what kind of stood out was we had a barricade situation over in Woodside Gardens, and Corporal Stokes, who is asset trained, was also the supervisor that night, but also was able to hold down the scene and work with our SWAT team as they executed a search warrant into the house and recovered a number of guns. And also, I think some of you were on the email, Lieutenant Miguez thought that he came upon a minor traffic accident on, was it Forest and Spa? Mm-hmm. Forest and Hilltop. And the driver was suffering a heart attack. And Lieutenant Miguez started CPR, and then fire showed up, used AED, and transported him, and he ended up surviving. So I think those are 2 very good examples of what we've got going on in the department. Crime numbers are, for November, we were 95 incidents in 2018, Part 1 incidents, compared to 88 for 2017. So we had 7 more incidents than we did compared to November of 2017. And that was driven, we had 5 more burglaries, and we had a few more larceny from autos, or just larcenies. We got pretty hit hard in Hunt Meadows over November, where we actually had 12 larceny from autos in one night. And the problem with that is, and I keep reminding people, and if you would keep reminding people, take the stuff out of your cars, especially holiday season, right? Take the stuff out of your cars, put it in the trunk, and make sure your car doors are locked, because they'll just go through, they'll try door handles, and they'll walk down the street trying door handles. And if they get in, they're going to rummage through and see if there's anything of value, and take that from your car. So, and a lot of these go unreported because I guess it's just nature to people not to report it. They think it's a minor crime. You know, they took $5 in change out of my console or something like that. we would encourage people to report this so we know where these incidents are occurring and we can deploy our resources in the proper manner. Any questions? I'm rolling right along.
No.
Good? Okay. So one other thing I'd like to comment on is we're redoing our strategic plan for the next 4 years. Pretty much our strategies remain the same. Our 4 strategies are improve community safety, improve career development, improve community outreach and communication, and maintain high professional standards. Then under each strategy, we set a number of goals, and we're working through those now. And then finally, we will set a cost to each of those goals and bring it before the council and ask for a lot more money than what we already have. But what's unique about this time that we're going through the process is that we have assigned a captain each a strategy. So the captain is responsible. We have 4 captains. Each one is responsible for a strategy. And then they bring in a lieutenant, and the lieutenant is responsible for working through the underlying objectives of the goals that we're going to reach. So there's buy-in from top down to the lower levels that, okay, this is what we came up with as a team because they all worked together to develop it. And now as we work through it, everybody's going to have input on how we achieve these goals. So I thought that was pretty unique. Generally, it's just been tablets handed down from the mountain, and this is what our goals and objectives are, and this is how we're going to achieve it. I think when you include top to bottom, rank and file, then you're going to get a lot more buy-in to and be successful.
Question, Chief.
Yes,
is there going to be any cross-pollination between the goals? I mean, it's going to be one of the captains and down to the lieutenant, but will there be any cross-pollination with the goals? Say if it's goal number 1, will the folks under goal number 2 be able to give input for goal number 1?
Absolutely, but at some point during the process, you rotate through.
Oh.
So everybody has their hand in each strategy.
Good. Okay.
What else do I have for you? So, you want to talk about overdoses?
Can I jump in,
Yes, ma'am.
Certainly.
Madam
I
Chair?
try.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Chief, we had the opportunity to speak about some concerns that were expressed by residents about preserving their confidentiality
Yes, ma'am.
when they call in on the anonymous tip line.
Yes,
and then you did respond to an email I sent and indicate that it's something that you were going to address. I just was looking for an update on, so when you address that, how does that happen? Is that something that's incorporated into the training that you do? Is there a certain number of training hours, training time we could anticipate the officers to have with regard to that? Do you have to bring in someone from the outside? Is it just reiterating existing policies, or?
I think that's what it is, reiterating existing policy.
Okay.
I've already spoken to the director of communications, so when we have that 911 call, they're, one, not asking for information if the person says that they want to remain anonymous. If there is a callback, and Alderwoman Henson, we had this discussion about what happened in Bay Ridge about they saw somebody put a gun in the trash can, and then they got a call, wanted to remain anonymous, but got a call back. And so I thought, well, they were just trying to find out more information. So I think, to me, I thought it was okay that we did call them back because they're still remaining anonymous, but when they do call them back and ask for additional information, because it may be a safety issue for the officer or maybe some other issue, that they reiterate that I'm calling you back, I need more information, but you are still remaining anonymous during that call. I've actually had a conversation with Lieutenant Krause, and we're changing our neighborhood watch to, what did I call it? Annapolis Watch. And so we are going to reinvent the wheel a little bit, and we're going to start handing out numbers for people. So if you want to register in your community as a block watcher, then we'll provide you a number. Of course, we will know who you are. But when you call, you say, I'm block watcher number 32, and that's how you'll be, recognized.
Isn't that the old neighborhood watch?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I think that speaks to a different but kind of similar concern that the residents expressed, and that's when they call for service, that sometimes they were identified by the responding officer. That responding officer would say, we got a call, that person in unit 1137 called and said you guys were outside making noise, we need you to move.
And so that was part of the process, part of the things that I discussed with the Director of Communications, is that they're not to provide that information to the officer. If that person wants to remain anonymous, then that information isn't given to the officer who goes to the scene. And by providing block watch numbers, that should eliminate the process too.
Has there been, what I hear you saying is that you've had an opportunity to speak with the Director of Communications, that if they are giving information from dispatch to an officer, to not provide the information of a caller who said, I want to remain anonymous.
Correct.
If a person does not say, I want to remain anonymous, but they're calling for service, have we developed a training on how to train the officer on just not disclosing that person in Unit X called about the incident?
Well, there's a difference. So sometimes the caller wants to be seen, and sometimes the caller doesn't want to be seen. So we need to address when the caller doesn't want to be seen. So we can take care of that in a short time.
Is that, would that information be collected by the dispatch office, by the dispatch person to say, or at what time would you understand or discern if this is an incident where the caller wants the person to know or where they don't?
That would be the initial telephone conversation on the phone with the dispatcher. Generally, so the dispatcher would say, may I have your telephone, your name and your telephone? I wish to remain anonymous. That's the end of it. If the person does provide the information, then the next question is, do you want to see an officer? And I think that's where we're coming in. The person may say, here's my name and telephone number. No, I don't want to see the officer. And then the officer goes and knocks on the door, and that's where we have our issues.
Who develops and facilitates that type of training? Is that something you guys do in-house, or
It would be something in-house, yes.
Okay.
And it's something the Director of Communications could work on.
I'm going to ask again at a future meeting, just so I make sure I can carry back to the residents. I think that'll be very powerful for them too, to know that they had your ear at a meeting and that they raised some concerns, and that those concerns were taken back to the department, and that the department was able to take those concerns, implement some training, and that's something that's going to be changed in the future.
That's a very easy fix, so I'm glad to do it.
That's excellent to hear. The Citizens Advisory Panel that you had, we hadn't had the opportunity to discuss it, and I kind of just tagged it onto the email that I sent. How is that, we didn't, as a council, we kind of kept our hands off of that because we knew once we touched it, it got subject to a bunch of different things that kind of took it out of what you wanted it to be.
Yes, ma'am.
How's that going? I know that we don't have any formal reporting process, but just informally, has that been a benefit to you, or how is that?
It's been a very good benefit. We call it the Chiefs Advisory Team because I don't want to use the word panel, I don't want to use the word board, I don't, commission. It's a team. We're a team. We meet once a month. It's going very well. We have a diverse group. We have very good conversations. They gave me input on the strategic plan that we're working on. So I've got residents talking about our strategic plan. I've got residents doing our SWOT analysis, our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. They reviewed that. They reviewed our transfer policy that is brand new to the department. So they're involved in a lot of things. 2 or 3 of the people who are on the team are also working to establish the police foundation. So they've become very heavily involved in the department. We invited them to our Thanksgiving dinner. We'll invite them to our holiday dinner. They do ride-alongs. They're very involved.
Excellent. The Net Officer Program, I know that Eastport Terrace and Harbor House, they have a really successful team there with Officer Smeichel and Officer
Clement. We'll just go by first name,
okay.
Clement.
Thank you. They are great.
Aberdingby. Yeah.
Is that Can you explain to me just a little bit more about the net officer program? I don't see that in some of the other communities that I represent, and I believe it's a staffing issue, but I'd like to understand better what net officer program is and how we get that into some of the other communities.
Hire more cops. So roughly about, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, I was doing research into different programs, and Boston PD has kind of the same thing in that program, except it's a full team. So when you have a neighborhood, you have 6 or 7 officers assigned to that neighborhood, and they're pretty much, the idea is, one, that they're embedded in the neighborhood. They use alternate transportation. I know when it gets cold, they could be, but I'd like to see them out on bikes. I'd like to see them, we have a couple of segways, foot, whatever, I'll give them a skateboard if they want to skateboard. But it's the idea of, one, they're in the community, they learn who the residents are, they're involved with the residents, they're involved with the kids, and so it's got a community aspect to it. But let's not also forget that they're law enforcement officers. So there's an enforcement aspect of it too. And I think if you build the community aspect, it's a lot easier to get a consensus when you do the enforcement aspect. So that's what they're working on. The two good things about Officer Smikle and Officer Abedingbi is that they are also DARE trained. So they are in the elementary schools working with kids about making the right decisions, and then they're back that night in their community walking foot. So there's this constant vision of these police officers, and being in the schools gives them a little bit different perspective of what we really do. So if I could expand it, I would love to expand it. At one point, we had 2 people in Harbor House, Eastport Terrace. We had 2 officers in Robinwood, and now we have just the 2 officers in Harbor House, Eastport Terrace, and a sergeant on Clay Street. My idea next would be to move it into Robinwood and maybe Woodside, Newtown. It's just difficult because it does, with the 2 of them, I can pretty much say, okay, 7 days a week, we can manage coverage. Of course, we're going to have off for training, we're going to have off for vacations and things of that sort, but there are weeks that we have 7 days a week coverage, and so if I can get 2 in, I'd like to get 2 in. If I get 1, I'll be happy getting 1 in, right? Just get that 1 foot in there and see where we go from there. I can tell you that staffing, I've been here before and told you the woe is me story, and it's been an issue. It's been a real issue. So.
Thank you.
But if I could expand it tomorrow, I would expand it tomorrow. I think it's a great program and it works fairly well.
Okay. Thank you.
Have you explored this with our city manager?
Explored.
Trying to get funding for additional?
It's not
officers?
necessarily the funding, it's the personnel.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was the funding.
No, it's the personnel.
Okay. All right. Well, you had some innovative suggestions as to trying to hire police officers.
We're
and
trying.
You can tell us, if you like, about that. Marketing and brand.
We're trying. So if you haven't been by the police station, we have a new banner up.
No.
I'd encourage you to come by.
It's under
The very first line is serve your community. If we can get people from Annapolis to come work at Annapolis, that would be fantastic. So it's serve your community. The Annapolis Police Department is now hiring with all our numbers. So we're doing that. We've expanded our presence on the internet and different websites and trying to get that way. Initially, we had just posted for new hires, which means they'd have to go through the testing process, the academy, et cetera. And we've expanded it to include lateral officers as well. It's difficult. We're looking at different things. I met with a lieutenant from Ocean City back in September, and he basically said, go west, go to western Pennsylvania. It's a hotbed for people who want to be police officers. And actually, we probably have 3 or 4 on our department now that went to Kevin, what is it, IUP? I don't know, it's a university in Western Pennsylvania.
University of Pennsylvania.
It's something, yeah. But it's supposed to be fertile recruiting ground, and so when they hire summer officers, that's where they go. And then we've also talked about going to New Jersey, New York, New England, because it's very difficult to get hired in those agencies. It's pretty much who you know. And we do have, I mean, Lieutenant Krause is from New Jersey. We have a couple officers from New Jersey. We have someone from New York. So we have those opportunities to send people who grew up in these communities to go back and recruit. And one of the newer things that we're going to do is we're going to send a female officer, because that's where we've been lacking in recruiting. And it's been historical that the police department hasn't had enough women in the agency. So that's something that we're focusing on.
Okay. Going back to the training issue, is there any kind of simulation for those that have been trained as far as taking the 911 calls? I mean, is there something that they're being trained to as far as listening to, I won't say a fake call, but a call that they can learn from?
So our dispatchers, their training is about 6 months before they're working the console, they're working the phones, but they're always working under the supervision of another dispatcher. I think that we get away from our training, and sometimes that training just has to be reiterated and brought to the attention. I think that initially they know what the right thing to do is, and then it's easy just to become complacent and then let the guidelines slip a little.
Okay, fine. I'd also like to hear from you regarding our year-to-date overdose summary. I know we're going to hear from OEM, but I also like to hear the police perspective.
So, year-to-date, we're looking at 129 heroin opioid overdoses. We have this year 12 fatal overdoses. Is that the number? My number's right. 9. Why do I have 12? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at 2017. That'll make a difference. Okay. So this year we have 9 fatal overdoses, 2 white males, 0 white females, and then 4 black males and 3 black females. And so I think that's where the tide has flipped. It's not that it was gradually changing in a year. It went from 7 and 2, or 7 white victims of fatal overdoses and 3 African Americans, to now it's pretty much just the opposite, where it's 7 African Americans versus 2. So in a split second, it didn't take that long. I know that Chief Simmons and the mayor's office had an event on Saturday to address that issue, and so.
Do you have any thoughts on what turned the tide in that direction?
I don't know. Maybe the focus was too much on one community and because we knew that overdoses were occurring in the African American community. We knew that fatal overdoses were occurring there. I think it took us a while to maybe figure out how to get the message to the community. And I think that was done Saturday, and hopefully that continues.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
I hear people in some of the communities that I represent say that the issue for them is not specifically opioids, but some other hard street drugs. Do we have any data on some of those other ones? Is that available to us?
It is. So one of the things that we track is PCP use. So this year they're tracking 34 is what I have, 34 overdoses in PCP. And then last year we had 21, so that number's up as well.
Is it the same, and then this may be, it may take us to an OEM response, but is it the same way to treat that with the naloxone and the other things? Is there a way to fast act, help a person that's suffering from a PCP overdose, or what is that like?
It's dealing with someone who's high on PCP can go from having the strength of 10 men to being in a drunken stupor. It runs the whole gamut. Usually what we do is when we come across somebody like that, we just take them to the hospital and do an emergency eval with them. Narcan is not helpful in these situations.
Okay. When you are with arrest and everything, do you find that our arrest for having possession and selling these kind of drugs are also mirroring the overdose statistics? Does it kind of go up and down with the overdose statistics? Is there any correlation there between criminal stats on these drugs and drug use and abuse?
I'm not sure I follow the question.
It would, to me, and then I'm thinking, maybe my thinking is off, so I just wanted to check in with you on that if we are having this, if we're having it affect these communities in this way, and if we're having the demographics shift, if we're having the numbers uptick, that we would see an uptick in arrest for possession of these particular drugs. We would see maybe a demographic shift in who's being arrested for possession of these particular drugs, and then arrest for distribution of drugs. The variety of drug that a person would be distributing would likely mirror our overdose statistics as well. Are we seeing a connection there?
I don't know. I think more when it comes to dealers, that we're looking more in lower income neighborhoods when it comes to dealing heroin and opioids. I don't know of any, and maybe this is too broad of a statement, off the top of my head, maybe one or two Caucasians have been caught selling, and that doesn't mean that we're not trying. It's just it hasn't been brought to our attention like it is in the lower income communities because of the violence associated with drug dealing and where the violence is occurring. I think I'd have to double check the stats on opioid arrests are up because the number of overdoses are up. I don't know that number offhand.
I would look forward to
Sure.
information that kind of puts the crime statistics along with our overdose statistics to kind of see where the two meet, if they do at all.
Okay.
Any questions, Alderman Payon?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Baker.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next on the agenda is ID 30818, Annapolis Fire Department update, report and comments, year-to-date overdose summary. We have Deputy Chief Kevin Simmons with us this evening, as well as Deputy Chief Romali. Thank you, gentlemen. And want to recognize Lieutenant Kraus. Thank you, Lieutenant Kraus.
Hi, Chief Romali, Deputy Chief Romali from Fire. Just real quick, to add on to what Chief Baker said, our overdose statistics are a little more broad because we don't necessarily just track narcotics overdoses. Our overdoses include alcoholism, accidental medication, and things like that. So, and it also, because we're so intertwined with our counterparts in Anne Arundel County and because ours is a medical response, that our stats are not, we don't have raw data on just City of Annapolis stats currently. We're still looking at that. But for overdoses in general, our units responded to 454 so far this year. Of that, we've administered Narcan 127 to 127 patients. Now, not all patients, one dose of Narcan doesn't always work. So in all, we've administered 242 doses of Narcan. Typically, 1 or 2 doses will bring a subject back, but there's been cases where we've had to give up to 5 administrations of Narcan before we could get a response from the individuals.
Is that somebody that's been administered Narcan before, possibly?
That's quite possible, and their system takes, has accepted the drug more because they've been using But it varies. Sometimes it varies on how potent the drug is at the time. You ask Chief Baker about stats as it goes up. We can tell when there's a hot batch out there because our overdose rates go up at that time, or we have to administer Narcan. So we see that quite regularly.
Do they build up an immunity?
I don't know that it's
It's-
actually an immunity.
It's probably not the right word, immunity,
Yeah,
but
I don't think it's
resistance.
immunity to it. I think it's more of how potent the drug is at the time and what's all
okay.
involved in the drug. So we continue to participate in the Safe Stations project, which up until October 31st of this year, we've had 155 people come to the fire stations and ask for help. And the Safe Stations is just not narcotic issues. There's people with alcohol abuse, prescription drug abuse, and that is ongoing. Those stats are only up until October 31st of this year. We know we had 10 to 12 of them last month, and actually when we started this meeting, we had one at the Taylor Avenue station. That program is continually going on. Mobile Crisis has added an additional team out there because of funding through actually the county, city, and state, I believe, and Chief Simmons can go more into that. We continue to look at our programs and move forward. Chief Simmons can also go into the Your Life Matters movement that we have out there now. We've gotten some funding there to go out there, and that's to stop the bleed, Narcan, hands-only CPR, and we want to get out there and train as many people as we can. And Chief Simmons can go more into the funding for that and how we're going about that.
Okay, any questions for Deputy Chief Romali?
No.
Okay, thank you. Chief Simmons, you're up.
So, just to kind of piggyback on what the police chief said, we've had 170 overdoses as of November the 29th, and that's a 14% increase from last year. The culprits are heroin or some other opioid at 127. PCP cases were 34. And then we had 9 cases of other unknown drugs. Again, we had nine folks that had fatal overdoses. This is a 25% increase from 2017. We talked about, well, the fatal overdoses occurred, and Alderwoman, I know you heard this, but
Yes,
maybe
heard it on Saturday, yes.
maybe the other ones have not. 900 block of Primrose, the unit block of Parole Street, the 200 block of Jan Wall, the 100 block of Clay, unit block of Elkin Drive, 1100 block of Madison Street, 1100 block of Frederick Douglass Street, 1800 block of Poplar Street, and 900 block of President Street were all fatal locations of fatal overdoses. And we did have one yesterday, a 28-year-old female that we suspect might be our 10th. But until the medical examiner rules on that, we can't say for sure. So the chief actually touched on this group of 45-year-old and greater African-American males. And this is just prominent to the city of Annapolis. They've had 32 overdoses there. And what I suspect is that these folks are functioning heroin addicts. And they go about their day like we come home, we might have a beer or a glass of wine. They will do heroin. But with the introduction of fentanyl in the heroin and the fentanyl-heroin mix, when they start using the drug at the same amount that they used to, they're starting to overdose. So that's what we suspect with that. The next highest group for the city of Annapolis is the 25 to 34-year-old white males. And there have been 25 overdoses this year in that category. In that category in the county, that's the #1 category. So that's about all I have if you have any questions.
You can proceed and let us know about the grants that are out there and what's happening, and also let us know about, give us an update on the event on Saturday down at the American Legion as well.
So we, Fran Phillips, when she was the medical officer, when she was the public health officer, I brought to her attention about the difference from the county and the city. And we started looking at the data, and she says, you know, you're right. And I said, we need to take a different approach because it's affecting a different demographic. And she agreed with me. And what I liked about Director Phillips is she put her money where her mouth is. So she said, Kevin, give me some programs that you think would have an effect in the city of Annapolis. And I put it out there, and I came up with 3 programs. OD Free Annapolis, that's out of the OEM, Your Life Matters, which is out of the fire department, and Naptown Anti-Dope Movement, which is out of the mayor's office, which is a pretty neat program. I didn't know, when we first came out, I was skeptical about it. We had our first meeting on Saturday at the American Legion. It was a success. It was packed house. We had great testimonials from folks. We had people who could break it down in layman's terms on what happens when you use substances and how it affects your brain. I mean, that anybody can understand, and it was impactful. So it was about, from what, 11:30 to about 3 o'clock.
3:30.
3:30.
Yes.
And they didn't really want it to end, but that was the end of our time. But it was very powerful testimonies. I could see it. You know, I was watching folks as the testimonials were given and all the good information. And they had food, and they had a DJ, and it was a festive atmosphere, but it was all about anti-dope campaign, and I think it's successful for that low-income area, and I'm looking forward to doing it in other areas.
I thought the format was excellent. I mean, they had the vendors, they gave people opportunities to talk to the different vendors that were there. There was a presentation, like you said, about the brain. That lady was excellent, and other presentations, and then basically testimonials and the panel discussion. I thought the format was excellent, and it was packed. I thought it was very well received. I was there the entire time, but I could see the faces of the people who were there, including the vendors, who were very in tune to what was going on. We had a great, diverse group of vendors. And like you said, we had the DJ, but I thought it turned out well. Will was the moderator, the person, and Adatola did an exceptional job of organizing it and everything, and then the food as well. So, and the venue was perfect. The commander and the folks at the American Legion, I thought, did their due diligence in actually opening up their venue to this type of activity. I thought it was great. It really, really was. Any questions from the dais?
So, Alderwoman
Yes.
Henson, what?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Naptown anti-doping, I wanted to make sure, it looked a little bit like, to me, from seeing the photos, that it was preaching to the choir. Was it people there who did not have the information, and people who were, was the goal to get people in who were maybe seeking treatment, or people who were relatives or caregivers of people who were dealing with substance abuse, or what was the target audience? The photos and I didn't have the opportunity to be there, so my apologies that you never can capture the full essence from a couple of snapshots. But the snapshots that I saw, it looked like the people who were already invested in this mission. Was it to rally people who were already invested and to just re-energize them, or what was the goal?
I would say all of the above. One of the things that we looked at the substance abuse part of it, but also, and this is from attending meetings in your ward specifically, what I heard a lot of folks say is, how can I get my record expunged? And that's important to them. So we had folks there who could help them work on getting their records expunged. We had crisis response. So when you have a fit of violence in the community, you know, we need to get them out there faster. So they interacted with folks. We had an array of things, not only dealing with substance abuse, but any type of service that you can think of that we've been talking about in the various community settings. We tried to make sure it was there.
Did it look like there was a good mix of people who could engage the programs and services, or was it more so people who facilitate those who got to network with each other?
What I saw was relatives of people who could are substance abusers. I saw people there who had been substance abusers who are now either counselors or working in the field. That's what I saw. The photo that you saw, the group photo, by that time a lot of the people had left, and it was basically the people who were, for lack of a better word, cleaning up, tidying up, making sure everything was finished. But no, the people that were there, in fact, and I know, and I'm not gonna, it's a personal note, but one of the vendors there is a relative of mine who had gone through problems and is now working in the field. So it was an array of folks and around the workforce, ACLU. They had a good mix of vendors there to provide any kind of resources or updates. But what I liked about it, there were people actually there who could speak to relatives or even those who may have been substance abusers, even on the panel, that I thought was really, really powerful. And it was something where you could go back and really try to have a conversation with someone in your own family that may be struggling. Oftentimes that happens, and what you try to do is maybe get that person to come out at some point out of the shadows, for lack of a better word, to seek the treatment. But it was a mix, but at the end it was the people who basically were kind of cleaning up and getting things straightened out and that sort of thing. So yes, what you saw wasn't really what was going on. Yeah, it was excellent, I thought. For, like Kevin said, it was all of the above. You had a little bit of both.
And Alderwoman Henson, I'm looking forward to working with you and your ward for the next one. And we look at doing that sometime after the first of the year.
Absolutely.
Oftentimes for a first event, because we, to my knowledge, never had anything that even looked like that, you're not going to necessarily get the people who are looking or seeking for treatment. But the word, I think, will spread once it starts going around the city and relatives start talking and friends start talking. And you could kind of see some folks coming in who may be in the shadows. And so that was encouraging too. So it was a great mix, I thought. And the messages that were given, I thought, were extraordinarily powerful, especially from folks who have been down that road.
And I can tell you, I was on Clay Street doing my morning jog, and I stopped to talk to some folks, and they actually heard about it. They heard about it, so it's getting around.
All right. First time for anything, you might not necessarily get the actual people, but the word starts to spread. And if everybody's carrying the same message, there's a possibility that folks will start to say, you know what, maybe I need to do something positive now or seek some treatment. So that's what I saw there. But thank you so much. It was exceptional, in my opinion. Alderman Payon, do you have any questions?
No, none.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Next on the agenda, ID 311-18, OEM presentation, active assailant training, Deputy Chief Simmons, Office of Emergency Management Director.
I just want to give you a quick update on our active assailant training. It's been a terrible year for active assailants. January in Pennsylvania, we had 4 killed, 1 injured. February in Parkland, Florida, we had 17 killed, 17 injured. In April in Tennessee, we had 4 killed, 4 injured. In May, Santa Fe, Texas, 10 killed, 10 injured. In June 28th, 2018, Annapolis, Maryland, 5 killed, 2 injured. September, Bakersfield, California, 5 killed. October 27th in Pittsburgh, we had 11 killed, 6 injured. And then November the 7th in Thousand Oaks, California, we had 12 killed and 11 injured. This has been a terrible year for active assailants. And as you're aware, Annapolis Fire Police and OEM formed a planning team. Chief Baker and Chief Stokes issued us to plan to improve our active assailant response capabilities. And what we're charged with is realistic and challenging active shooter exercises to improve the way we manage an incident by implementing the National Incident Management System principles, and then to review best practices around the country and see if they work here in the city of Annapolis, and to develop fire and police policies that complement each other and don't contradict each other. So the training is in 4 phases. Phase 1 took place from April to June this year. We practice our movements and trying to neutralize a shooter, and we used the old library on West Street before it was razed. So we were able to do that. We had a tabletop exercise, and as you all remember, we were at St. Mary's High School doing our full-scale exercise. Phase 2, which we're in now, is September to December. We had an active assailant workshop, which you attended. I think you enjoyed, Alderwoman.
Yes.
And we had a tabletop exercise, and our full-scale exercise is this coming Thursday at J. Albert Adams Academy. We have over 70 citizens that are going to help us with this, and we're trying to up our game. We're going to have a lot more people who are wounded, injured, killed, and how we actually respond to that sort of thing. And then we have to evacuate people from one point to another. How well do we do that? All that's going to be tested this coming Thursday, and that we get started about 4 o'clock and would end about 8 o'clock at night. And another part with this one is we're starting to add some of our other partners: the Maryland Capitol Police, the Navy Fire Department, the Health Department, Social Services, just for starters and all. So phase 3 is coming from April to June in 2019. We're going to make sure our policies are in order. We're going to start involving the hospital. We're going to concentrate more on family reunification, and then we're going to get our fellow county folks in to help us out. And then phase 4 is going to be the fall of 2019. We're just going to put it all together. We're going to have one massive exercise to exercise everything that we've learned, everything that our policies say that we can do. We're going to exercise all of that in 2019. You all are certainly invited to come out Thursday if you want to see it, if you want to participate, whatever your comfort level is. So, any questions?
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Any questions from the dais? Alderman Payne.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Alderwoman Henson.
If I may just comment, as the shootings have continued to happen nationally, unfortunately, the national news media continues to commend the response in Annapolis when they are talking about best practices and they are talking about responding to these tragedies. When I see them, they continue to speak the name of Annapolis in high esteem and say, when it happened in Annapolis, this is what happened and how it was handled and how it was responded to. And they continue to do that in a way that just shows that we have done something in the city. The efforts of OEM, the trainings, that these things have worked and they have resulted in a best practice that has seemed to be recognized nationally by people who understand this and who do this. When they bring the experts in to talk about it, they have only continued to have great things to say about Annapolis. So it's an unfortunate way to be recognized, but in an unfortunate circumstance, it is great to see the high praise that the city has gotten for the response that was by the county and city. It's encouraging to hear you talk about the health department and DSS joining in on your efforts and starting to collaborate with them. I always think about unfortunate things like Hurricane Katrina and how many people were vulnerable in the city of New Orleans because of lack of resources.
In Annapolis, we have a great deal of people, Alderwoman Pendle Charles knows the numbers exactly, who live in public or subsidized housing, who by definition are people who, according to the area median income, are either low income, extremely low income, whatever way you fall in the bracket to be eligible to live there, could leave you in a position where you are vulnerable in terms of resources, and to know that you are starting to coordinate with the health department and DSS so that should we have an emergency that's on a large scale like that, that we don't have people that are left behind or people who are left out because resources is an issue. So that's encouraging to hear that we are taking steps to coordinate on that level as well.
Well, I would have to say a lot of credit goes to Chief Stokes and Chief Baker. You know, if they weren't on board, we wouldn't be able to do this. A lot of credit goes to the mayor and the city manager. When I come to them and say, hey, look, I need to shut down Duke of Gloucester, major artery in the city, so we could do this and do it right. And they say, yes, we see the importance of this. Yes, you can do that. And I got to give it to public safety. You guys support us. You know, anything that we need, you always say, hey, come to us, let us know. And I got to commend the community. When I put this out and I told the community that we needed help, we needed volunteers, we had to shut it down because we had so many people responding. And also, it's cliche-ish, but it really does take a village, and it takes everybody's cooperation. So we're only successful because we all pull together.
Thank you. I want to say this on a personal note. I would be derelict in my duties, being your public safety chair, if I did not totally support the budgets that the fire department, the police department, along with OEM, bring to us during that time of the year. I mean, I have to. It is a given that I must support what you all do from a budgetary standpoint. I listened to a presentation recently, an internal presentation concerning what had occurred at the Capitol building. And what I heard was extraordinarily moving. And it brings to bear the fact that, for instance, if we have a piece of equipment that is necessary that we never use at all, it comes into play when we have an incident like that. That is extraordinarily important, that we have every capability to proceed with something, and Lord knows I hope it never, ever, ever on any magnitude happen again. But it was brought to bear, and the small things that went into what needed to be done on that day, to the point of the bathrooms that were needed for the first responders. Where could you get food for the first responders? I mean, it was down to every detail imaginable. And those are the kinds of things that need to be discussed. I won't necessarily say openly, but amongst my colleagues, to understand exactly what went into that operation. I mean, what I heard was unbelievable. And I have to say that because I think that's extremely important. Like I said, if there's a piece of equipment that's never used, when it's your own loved one that's involved, it brings it all home to bear.
Well, may I suggest, actually this is your idea, may I suggest maybe a closed session with the major? And I think that would be impactful for the council.
Extremely. That was something that I did mention to Chief Stokes as well as you, that I think we all need to hear that. There's some elements in there that need to be discussed and known by members of this council as well as the mayor. The mayor was there. So that's something I'm definitely going to pursue. We need to hear it. There were some things that we could never imagine that went on, and the presentation was extraordinarily powerful. So thank you so much for being here and for everything that you do each and every day. We go home and we sleep in our nice warm beds while you all are out there, whether it's police, whether it's fire, whether it's OEM, no matter what it is, we don't think about it, but you all do, and you're on the job 24/7, 366 when it's leap year. And we thank you so very much for what you do. Thank you again.
And thanks for your support.
Certainly.
Thank you.
I'm going to make one comment. We normally don't have guests at our meeting, but I see we do have 2 guests today. And we certainly thank you for coming. If there's anything that we can respond to you for the reasons that you're here, certainly let us know. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Come up to the mic.
You're on Facebook Live.
That's true.
You have a right to remain silent. Anything?
I'm a practicing physician with University of Maryland in Centerville. I came particularly to this meeting because I found out that there would be drug overdose that would be discussed today, and I have specific interest into public safety and what goes into the backplay of this. I have seen this from a medical perspective as a doctor, but how our fire department and how police officers are dealing with it, it was important for me. From my husband's perspective, I would leave it to him.
Well, my name is Dr. Ravish, and right now I'm doing a master's in public health in Johns Hopkins. So I got this project to write a reflection on the meeting. And we found out this is a good opportunity. She also will get to know about what's going on as an overdose. Like Shelby used to tell me about how many patients she's having. And yeah, and fire department and police, it's like they always do a lot of work, like especially where we live in Kent Island, they have a volunteer fire department. And I found out it's like very interesting, so to know the facts.
And how actively involved they are in the community. So it's very different when you're coming from another country, you have migrated here and you're learning what this country actually goes through for the overdose and what kind of fatal incidents there are and how active the fire department and the police is. It's just amazing amount of work that they put into this.
Yeah, we also lived 3 years in Baltimore, so we understand like how this problem is like, it's really.
Yeah.
Right. Are there any questions that you still have after you've heard today that you need answered before you leave? Because we want to make sure you capture everything that you need for your paper.
Yeah, I think we got everything except I want to know your name.
Yeah. We, for a few seconds into the meeting, we thought you are Mayor.
We need to know your names also for the record, name and address.
Oh, okay.
And one question, I when I was listening to the chief of police.
You could let us know anytime.
Yeah.
Oh, you
What?
stated in the microphone, your name and your address.
Sorry. So my name is Ravish Bhardwaj, and address is 432 Oyster Cove Drive, Graysonville, Maryland 21638. And she's my wife. Address will be same, and her name is.
My name is Gurpreet Kaur Saini.
And we'll get the spelling.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we'll write it down. It will be complicated.
Oh, thank you. Yes, go right ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry. So my question is, like, if somebody want to stay anonymous, like if there is some crime scene or something like that, and suppose we present any, we give any information to the police officer, and we still don't want to come, can they still call us as a witness?
That's-
Chief is here.
Chief Baker,
Yeah, these can
Police
be
Department.
answered by those folks.
Two former prosecutors.
We'll leave it to the expert. We're retired.
So if you want to remain anonymous, that information isn't given to the state's attorney's office, and your information isn't put in a police report.
But can police or court can still summon us as a witness, or?
I've never had that happen. I suppose that a defense attorney could subpoena our records, and, right? I mean, could subpoena our records.
It
and
would
that
be
information
difficult.
could be- oh, wait, there's 3 attorneys up there.
It would be difficult, but it's probably not impossible that they would be
Right.
called as witnesses, but I'm like you, in all my years, I never saw it done. I did see it attempted, and most judges would say, you have to have a really, really good reason to do this before they would make the police research who this probably was. I don't think ultimately you could give the phone number without much of a problem, but
Right.
you really don't know who you're talking to.
No, there are so many,
I could be using his phone,
and there are so many phone carriers, and then you've got burner phones and everything else.
it's very difficult to do.
Very difficult.
I think that drives home the point of protecting confidences, because if we do call people back, if we do start to ask more questions that discloses their identity, certain records are the subject of public information, so people in public information requests could ask certain things of the police department and get information. People through the subpoena process, if it results in a case, could ask through the subpoena process to get information, and anything that we've recorded and captured that's there is then subject to either of those disclosures. So the more that we protect and preserve confidences, I think some people thought that if I call, my number's not even recorded. I'm calling just as if I dial *67 or some other thing that masks my phone number. I think people thought it was that level of anonymity. And to receive a return call, I think people were surprised to say, oh no, this is not something where it's anonymous, my number is captured somewhere.
Okay. Thank you.
And I have a question. For being a neighborhood watch member, how we do that? How we enroll into this?
So the program would roll out, and you'd have an opportunity to register online,
Okay.
provided your information, and then we would, or it might even be a community event, or your HOA may have a meeting and we'll have a representative there for you to sign up. You sign up and we provide you the number, and that's the only thing that you need when you call 911 or our non-emergency number.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks a lot.
We've been blessed to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Come back anytime.
Yeah, I kind of like it now.
We'll remember that.
I know it's a lot different, like we have a meeting in India, it's a very different kind of meetings, and it's kind of like my second council meeting I attended.
Right. Well, good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Oh, yes. I think we've reached the end of our agenda. Alderman Payon.
Madam Chairwoman, I would move that we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. And it is now 7:20 p.m. Thank you all very much.